Hi everybody, welcome to Gallery Bytes. I'm Jayme Yahr, Associate Curator here at the Crocker Art Museum in Sacramento, California. Thanks to all of you joining us live this morning and to those of you who are going to be watching the video later on our YouTube channel. I just wanted to say hi from our photography space and also let you know that I have a few of my colleagues here helping with the production of Gallery Bytes. Mallory Marsh, who will be taking your questions. Please feel free to type in your questions. Let us know what you're thinking, and also any questions for me, I'm happy to respond here on the spot, as well as Houghton Kinsman and Brian Sir, who are helping to produce the show and also show some of the images that I have for you today.
Well, Jayme, I'll start right off the bat with a question, if that's all right with you.
Perfect.
All right, so I see you standing in front of a wall with photos. I understand it's a really small selection of what we have in the museum's photography collection. Could you take some time to tell us a little bit more about the collection, about what we own, what we collect, and any highlights that we have?
Thanks, Mallory. This is a perfect way to start our time together today. I'd love to tell you about the photography collection as a whole and also to show you some images that are a bit behind the scenes in the Crocker's photography collection. So we have about 1,300 photographs in our collection. So that's 1,300 photographs. So that's a lot of work to have kind of behind the scenes, especially when right now I only have 3 works on view. So just keep that in mind. Our collection is really strong in the areas of human condition and human experience. So what we mean by that is images of people in every day, images of people out in the world, images of people in environments, very strong in those areas. Our collection is international. So we have photos from all over the world, although I will say that our strongest areas are American and European photographs. Part of that is because the Crocker has a long-standing mission and vision of collecting California art in particular, West Coast art, and then American art as a whole. We do also have a very strong European collection. So these strands connect us to our larger permanent collection, which is about 25,000 objects overall. I'm working to expand our holdings of the photography collection in those international strains, specifically looking beyond the Western world or the Western canon. So thinking about images by photographers in Africa, in Asia, thinking about photographers in Australia. So a larger range I'm looking to kind of add to our collection as a whole. So thinking a little bit further about this, what I'd love to do is show you some images of that big 1,300 piece collection. Now, I talked about the fact that we have an international collection, we have a range of works, we have works by photographers of all gender identities. We also have artworks that span in time. So chronologically, we're going from very early photography, so thinking about early 1800s daguerreotypes. And you're seeing here an image of 2 boys. This is a daguerreotype from our collection. So this is really early photography. This is photos when you had to sit perfectly still or otherwise the photo would be blurry. Long exposure times, really big glass plate style negatives. And these are also photographers that we don't necessarily know. So we have unknown photographers in many of these early works, which we're hoping to eventually do research on and identify those photographers if possible. We have another image next, which should be of a minor. And again, this is another unknown photographer. This is an ambrotype. So just kind of showing you the development of photography chronologically, and also giving some clues as to the types of photographs and photographic processes that are represented in our collection. So moving from that daguerreotype to the ambrotype. I don't have an example of this in the images, but we have tintypes in our collection as well. So often these are related to photographs on metal plates, again, big cameras, and these early photographs that would have been rare to have your photograph taken maybe more than once or twice in your entire lifetime. So think about that now with your digital camera. How many photos do you have on view or on your camera? Thousands, 1,000, 10,000? How many photos do you take every day? How many photos maybe do your kids take or your friends take? can you imagine only one photo in your entire lifetime? So there's a really interesting difference in our collection between those early works and the later works. I wanted to show you an early California photographer, Carlton Watkins, very well represented in our collection. We have one of the largest holdings of his works in terms of museum views. He's well known as a California photographer. He was born in New York. He was good childhood friends with Collis Huntington, who ended up being one of the big four with the Central Pacific Railroad and sort of the Transcontinental Railroad. And Watkins and Hollis, they moved to California together during the gold rush in 1851. And while Collis Huntington had sort of his own way in business, Watkins ended up becoming a very popular sort of professional photographer. He focused on landscape photography and specifically on Yosemite and the Yosemite region. We very much owe Yosemite National Park to Watkins. His images were the impetus and very supportive in the move to create the national park at Yosemite. So you have the camping scene, and then I'll show you gold nuggets also, which we have in the collection. So these are really huge, very large gold nuggets as part of the California gold rush there in the early 1850s. If we continue to think about this movement through time, we move next to the early 1900s. We're really strong in the area or sort of concept of the Great Depression, the WPA, Works Progress Administration, and the FSA, the Farm Security Administration. So these are images from the 1920s, the 1930s, and then into the 1940s. So we have early holdings, California holdings, and as we move then into the 20th century, we're very strong in this area as well. Part of this is the focus on the human experience and human condition that I mentioned earlier, but also the idea that some of these photographers ultimately had connections to California. You're seeing Lewis Hine up here on the screen. Now, Lewis Hine worked during the Depression era, although he never worked for the Farm Security Administration or Roy Stryker, who was part or sort of lead of the historical division. If you're not familiar with this time in photographic history, it's a really interesting one. The Works Progress Administration was part of the American government's sort of reconstruction efforts and kind of idea of moving out of the Great Depression, moving out of the Dust Bowl. So the government did employ artists, not just photographers, but artists in mass to not only be employed, but also to create sort of cultural works that would further depressed areas within the country, marginalized populations, and also try to sort of rebuild or regroup after this period of great strife in American history. So the historical division was part of the Farm Security Administration, part of this larger Works Progress Administration. And it feels weird to have it under the Farm Security Administration, right? Like, why would you put photographers there? But the idea behind this entire process was to, quote unquote, document American history, American rural lands, farms, individuals who were trying to sort of make it out of the Depression itself. So I think there might be a question, and I'm going to stop here to answer that one.
Well, Jayme, you're getting a lot of thank yous and hellos in the chat, but we also got a question.
All right.
Are there any images of the Peter Palmquist collection of California women photographers in the museum's collection?
That is a very good question, and one that I don't think I can answer off the top of my head. But what I can say as a broader answer to that question is that we do have extensive holdings by women artists, women photographers in the collection, and we do have women California artists well represented in the collection, which actually leads me to my next image, which is one of Merriam post Wolcott. She is a photographer who was part of the Farm Security Administration. She was actually the first full-time woman photographer within that original FSA group. You might know Dorothea Lange. That name might come to mind. She's a well-known California photographer based sort of in the Bay Area, and she was a part-time photographer for the FSA. And we have really strong holdings of both Merriam Post Wolcott and of Dorothea Lange. We're actually going to have a show of Merriam Post Wolcott's work coming up in just over a year from now from the Crocker's collection. And then we're also strong in women photographers such as Imogen Cunningham, for example, who was part of group F64. And I think there might be a follow-up to that.
Do you happen to know the percentage of our photography collection that's female photographers?
Percentage of the collection that's female photographers, I would say roughly around probably 30%. And we're very strong in women photographers moving from the 20s through contemporary. And I'd say we've added quite a bit of contemporary photography by women just in the last few years, which is also exciting for the works I'm going to talk about just in a minute behind me, which are two of our contemporary women photographers that have been added to the collection. So it's a fairly strong collection of women photographers, and it's continually building. Some of those early photographs, there is potential they were taken by women and we don't even know because the photographers are unknown. But at the time, especially in the 1800s, it was primarily the profession of men to be photographers, at least in the true professional sense of artist studios and being reproduced in magazines. But it is possible that our collection is holding even slightly more than that, 30% women photographers. So as we move along, I want to take a little bit of a leap here. So we talked about some of our key holdings in the 1800s. I showed you some work from the early portion of the 20th century. And then moving on to the 21st century. So we do have very strong contemporary photography. The works that were on view just before this selection was actually a grouping of contemporary color photographs. So we changed the theme and the style, the artists, and some of the core ideas every time that we rotate the collection. You're seeing on your screen Gonkar Gyatso, who is a Tibetan photographer, and this is part of the My Identity series. This is one of the 4 images that we have in that series, in which case he creates self-portraits representing different aspects of his life and career. So you're seeing the modern view, he calls it, of himself here, in which case he moved to London to study photography and artwork more formally at school and kind of embraced a modern identity that was a bit apart from what he calls his traditional Tibetan identity. We also have in our collection works of photography that include things like collage or might be mixed media. So I have an image to show you by the artist Leslie Sarr. She is a Los Angeles-based artist, the daughter of Betty Sarr, a well-known mixed media and assemblage artist. And this is a work that entered our collection very recently, within, just the last year and a half or so. And this piece, I Turned My Back on the Ocean, is a sort of Victorian photograph with paper collage of a skeleton on top of it. So it's this kind of collage work, but it's based in photography. And I love the Victorian feel of this piece. I think it connects back to some of those daguerreotypes that we've seen. And this also an idea, it's a very California based. I don't know if anyone's ever heard the phrase, don't turn your back on the ocean, right? You can get easily swept away by a wave. And here she's saying that this individual has literally turned her back on the ocean, kind of gone against the mainstream and put herself in harm's way. I think there might be another comment or question. No, we're good? Okay, perfect. So if you're out there listening, please feel free to send in those questions. Always fun to hear about what you're thinking or what you'd like to know about the Crocker's photography collection. So I've shown you some daguerreotypes. We've talked about a little bit about early photography and unknown artists. We moved into the 1920s and 30s with the FSA, then talked really briefly about some of these works that have come in recently. I want to show you a work by a local Sacramento artist. This is the photograph Synchronized Swimmer Drama by Raul Gonzo. And he is based in West Sacramento. He is a well-known videographer as well as a photographer, and I'm absolutely thrilled that he'll have a solo show here in 2024. We have a number of his works that are in the permanent collection, and they're just amazingly fun, very colorful. He often uses local, regional, and state-based models in his work and likes to exaggerate sort of everything. I think of him as sort of a modern-day Willy Wonka. I think he's fabulous and very excited to be working with him. So I wanted to show you the range of artists, California-based artists, international artists, artists who are emerging or local as well. The collection is very wide-ranging and very broad. So what I'd like to do now as we move from Raoul's work, which is contemporary just within the last few years, to show you the photography wall here and to talk about what's on view behind me. So this photography wall and photography space, it's in our permanent collections galleries here at the Crocker Art Museum. So when you come to visit, we now have photography always on view. This wasn't the case until basically, early 2020, right before the pandemic, right before COVID hit. The problem with photography is that it's very light sensitive, and it's typically on paper. So this is not something you can have on view all of the time because it can fade or become damaged very quickly. So photographs have to be rotated much more often than paintings or sculptures or other types of works. So we're rotating this space roughly twice a year. And it might be a small selection, but it allows us to get really intimate with the pieces and to present these small themes kind of twice yearly. So what I have behind me in honor of Photography Month, which is right now, April, very exciting that Photography Month will now be a yearly event here in Sacramento. We have the work of two women artists on view. If you look all the way to each end here, you're going to see two photographic works by the artist Kristen Kapp. And in the center, right behind me, you're going to see the work of Donna Ferrado. So I want to start off on this side with the yo-yo piece. And this is the work of Kristen Kapp. Now, Kristen Kapp is an artist who was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest. She grew up in Seattle and became very interested in documenting human presence within natural environments using a Rolleiflex camera. So those of you who know a bit about photography or might be interested more in the technical side, Rolleiflex are cameras that are often used by street photographers. They can capture movement very well. So in the Kristen Kapp image that you're looking at here, this is called Yo-Yo Ride. So what I love about this image, and I'll just talk about it for a moment and then I know we have a question, is the sense of movement in the space and also this slightly off-kilter angle or perspective that we see Kapp utilizing here. So I don't know if some of you out there have ever been on a yo-yo ride, maybe at a state fair, but it's like a big tilt-a-whirl swing. They scare the heck out of me. But basically, there's something like 30 to 33 seats in the yo-yo ride. Each individual person is in a little seat, and it's held together by chains. And as the ride starts to go, it starts to twirl and tilt, and your swings will fly around and tilt outwardly. So a little bit of fear in this image too. But what I love about this is the perspective. Not only the yo-yo ride in the foreground of the space, but the Ferris wheel in the background. But because of the way that Kapp has captured this moment in time, it almost looks like the yo-yo riders, the swing, folks on the swing, are crashing into the Ferris wheel in the background. There's also an interesting sense of tilting or perspective down here with the landscape and the trees in the background, and it kind of sets you in that off-kilter way. But in many ways, very relatable. Going to amusement parks or, again, state fairs, this idea of a human presence that has kind of altered that landscape. What I love about Kapp's work, though, is the human presence is there. It's often kind of eerie, but it's not necessarily the key focus. It becomes about the ride and the movement, but the people add to that environment. So I think we had another question that I want to make sure that we answer.
You know, we do, Jayme. Suzanne at home is asking a question, but I know where you're headed, so I'm actually going to put a pin in it. I'm going to let you get through these two, and then come back to me and I'll ask you Suzanne's question to kind of lead us into the next.
Perfect. Okay, Suzanne, hang on just 1 second and I promise that we'll get to your question. I want to head over to Kristen Kapp on the other side of the photo wall here to talk a little bit about the subway train Brighton Beach. So this piece, again, I think you can start to see Kapp's style a little bit here. Not only do we have the buildings in the background, we have not only a very low building here, there's graffiti on the side of this building, barred windows, but then a much more sort of historic looking, multi-level, somewhat fancier building in the background here. So we have almost this multi-level, thinking a little bit about New York City, the various neighborhoods, the diversity of the neighborhoods, and also the diversity of the spaces, the architecture, the environments. And then in the foreground of the scene, much like in Yo-Yo Ride, we have a blurred vision of a human standing inside a subway train as it speeds along the tracks. So it becomes almost like a ghostly image. We can't see the identity of the figures, we don't see their facial features, but we can see this sense of movement in something that is momentarily recognizable. And I just love this idea of capturing those everyday moments in ways that make us stop and think a little bit further. Now, Kapp did spend a lot of time living and working in New York City and also in Brazil. She is now based in Namibia in Africa and teaches documentary photography based in social justice. So she's a really interesting career, a photographer certainly to watch, and still a very active photographer as well. And I want to talk about the center piece here, which is a little bit different in style, but also representative of New York. This is Odeon, the restaurant in Tribeca, in the neighborhood within New York City. Donna Ferrado is a California-born artist. She actually studied at the Art Institute in San Francisco very early on in her career. She ended up moving in the 70s to New York City, where she became very famous for capturing nightclub life, or sort of club life in the 70s. And from there, she went on to document violence against women and domestic violence, for which she has won numerous awards and become very well known for. In the aftermath of the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2001, so 9/11, Ferrado decided that one of her kind of new series of works would be to capture her neighborhood of Tribeca. So she also has a whole very prolific series of images of Tribeca post 9/11. And this is where this image kind of fits into her larger body of work. So what I love about this piece, in many ways, it echoes Kristen Kapp. There's an interesting perspective to the work. It's a little bit ghostly and eerie, and it also questions what's in the foreground, what's in the background, what's tilted upward. So we have table settings here on the Odeon table, glasses, silverware, napkins. But the way that she shoots this, it creates shadows that almost look like the pieces are falling off the table, or we have some sense of what is 3 dimensions versus 2 dimensions. So we have an interesting photo wall here that I love to talk about because it's also contemporary black and white photography. These are archival pigment prints. One thing that I wanted to mention about our larger permanent collection is that our biggest area of the permanent collection in terms of photography and medium of photography are gelatin silver prints. So when we looked at the Lewis Hine and we looked at the Merriam post Wolcott, those were gelatin silver prints, black and white photography. Don't forget that black and white photography doesn't mean that something is old or something comes from the 1800s. We still have photographers working in that medium and that style today. So I want to get back to our questions.
So Jayme, this is Suzanne's question.
Okay, Suzanne.
Is there any possibility of an upcoming exhibition that would feature more of the museum's collection, like more than just a few pieces on one wall?
Yeah, this is a great question. Thank you, because it'll actually kind of segue into some other things I'm hoping to talk about today. So we have some exciting things upcoming in terms of photography. I'll just give you a little bit of a taste, and then I'm going to go a little more in depth into one of those. So coming up this summer, we have a show that is titled Twinkie, Tebow, and the Art of the Pose. And this exhibition is going to be largely a photography exhibition. So that's exciting for us. We have a few works from the permanent collection there, but we have many works that are promised to our collection. So when we say that, we mean that we expect them to enter the collection formally and most likely after the run of that exhibition. We also have coming up in a little over a year from now is the Merriam Wolcott show, which I know I mentioned very briefly, but that show is completely Crocker collection. So we have over 50 works by Merriam Wolcott, and it's all going to be her pieces in that exhibition, all from the Crocker's collection. And the plan is also to put in some of the shooting scripts that the government originally wrote for Merriam Wolcott that told her what to photograph, where to photograph, essentially her assignments. So it's going to be a really interesting way of thinking about documentary, about propaganda, about the government, about Merriam Wolcott's role within that, as well as her later years spent in California. So that's going to be upcoming. We also have the Raul Gonzo show in 2024, in which case we will feature the works that are currently in our collection, and I'm working with Gonzo closely to have some of the additional works from his personal collection inside that exhibition. So we do have a number of photography works and exhibitions coming up very soon, and I'm always looking for what comes next. I really love the idea, and I'm hoping we can do it somewhere in the 2025 range, is a show of California photography with a highlight on our collection. So that would span from the daguerreotypes all the way to contemporary. So it would be a much bigger range of thinking about and looking at California over time. Looks like there might be another question.
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
Do you know, after these three come down, can we get a sneak peek of like a theme you're thinking about for the next one, or what you're leaning towards?
Ooh, there's still many things kind of at play in the mind here, but what I can tell you is that coming up in the fall, we are hosting an exhibition called Modern Women, Modern Vision, which is all photographs by women photographers that are in the Bank of America's permanent collection. They have a fantastic art collection and an art in communities program, in which case they lend their artwork to institutions. So my hope is to continue the theme of women photographers. I like the idea of thinking about maybe bringing up some of the earlier works. We'll see how that kind of progresses, but we're moving from Women Photographers in Photography Month to the Twinkie show, which is very much based in women artists and representations of women's bodies, and then to Modern Women, Modern Vision, all women photographers. So I'm hoping to stick with women photographers as we move through this year, but beyond that, I really like the idea of mixing it up, because I love contemporary photography, but the last two rotations have been contemporary, so I'd love to get out some of those early photos as well. So stay tuned on that, we'll see. So with that, I do want to move into just a little bit of a sneak peek. So thank you, Suzanne and Mallory, for your questions, because it helps me move into the next bit of this presentation, which is thinking about Twinkie, Tebow, and the Art of the Pose. So Twinkie, Tebow, and the Art of the Pose, it opens up in mid-June here at the Crocker Art Museum. Now, what the heck is this? You're probably thinking, right? What is this exhibition? Well, this show is all about Twinkie Tebow. Twinkie Tebow was the daughter of Wayne Tebow, world-renowned Sacramento-based painter and artist, and his wife Patricia Tebow. Now Twinkie, from a young age, because she was like hanging out with her dad, right? She modeled for him. He would draw little sketches when she was a child. As she got older, she started formally posing for him for some of his larger works. So she'd put on a formal dress and he'd paint a portrait, for instance. Then as she progressed into adulthood and also into her professional career, she worked with photographers. So 1970s California photographers. I want to briefly show you the photograph by Judy Dater. Judy Dater, one of the members of Group F64. She subscribed to those ideals, and when I say that, it's a San Francisco-based group of photographers working in, roughly the 70s in California, the Bay Area, led by Imogen Cunningham, Brett Weston, Edward Weston, and they really believed in straight photography. And what I mean by that is no digital manipulation or darkroom manipulation. At this time, digital was not quite fully formed, but no darkroom manipulation. They wanted to use large format cameras, aperture 64, and really focus in on the fine details. So Judy Dater was a proponent of these straight photography ideals. This work here, Twinkie and Tree, taken roughly 1970 at Judy Dater's Marin, California house. And Twinkie is very well known for posing, modeling. She was an artist model, not a fashion model, not a runway model, but an artist model. And she did a lot of life modeling as well. As we move to our next image, I'll show you some of the variety of works that you should expect to see in the show. As we move through time into the 80s, into the 90s, into the 2000s, we start to see the change from straight photography to digital manipulation. John Reef Williams, a Los Angeles-based artist, is well represented in this exhibition as well. He and Twinkie formed a many decades partnership, in which case she would pose for various photography sessions. I'll show you another one of the photographic pieces that's in the show, Elizabeth Opelnick, who does a lot with color photography and again manipulation of these digital images. So very fun to see Twinkie as not only she moves through time in her career, the way she develops as an artist model, also the aging of her physical body becomes a theme within this work. And I wanted to show you another piece here, a piece I love by Kim Campbell, who is a Portland, Oregon-based artist, in which case Twinkie has this sort of gauzy strip over her face. She almost looks like a seashell emerging from the ocean. So this show is going to feature over 100 works of art. Every single work in this show represents Twinkie, from her earliest days as a baby, literally in her first year of life, all the way to 2022. So we move through 76 years of Twinkie's life in this exhibition, represented through the work of 33 artists. Most of the works in the show are photographs, so we do have a good number of photographs going from silver gelatin prints and archival pigment prints, tintypes in the show as well, a whole range of photographic processes, and it's fun to see this idea of one person represented in all of these different ways. So remember when I said daguerreotypes, you might have one in a lifetime? Twinkie's almost the complete opposite. So we've moved from one in a lifetime on daguerreotypes all the way to over 100 works that we're going to see in this show. And it's not just photography, so anyone out there that might also be interested in painting or drawing, watercolor, we do have a range of works in the show, but photography makes up the bulk of it. So that's what's upcoming for me in June, very exciting, and then we move into Modern Women, Modern Vision from there. So we're really kicking off here in April this big photography month, but also the rest of the year being very well represented here at the Crocker Art Museum in terms of photography in our photography collection. So if there's any other questions, I'd love to answer those.
I have one. Let's end on something extra fun, kind of future forward. Is there anything we don't own that you would like to own?
So many things. So many things. So because our photography collection is international, I'm not as limited to a certain bit of chronology or a certain geographic area, which makes this part of my job so much fun because I get to think about what's happening not only here in Sacramento, here in California, America, or really just thinking about that entire globe. But what I'd like to do hopefully is to increase those international holdings. I'd like to increase photographers working in Africa as well as Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia. But in particular, in terms of America, we would love to add to our collection a work by Carrie Mae Weems or Dowd Bay. We don't have a Diane Arbus in our collection. So there's a lot kind of happening. In the early photography area, we're strong in Carlton Watkins, but we don't have a Timothy O'Sullivan, who's well known for Civil War imagery. So there's kind of a lot going on in terms of my wish lists and thinking not only about filling in specific artists or specific gaps we have, but also in thinking more internationally and in terms of inclusion and diversity and where we have lacked in the past and where we can go from here. So that's also on my mind as we move forward as well. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up Gallery Bytes for today. Thank you so much in joining me in the photography collection and the photography space. Again, I'm Associate Curator Jayme Yahr here, working with the photography collection. A big thanks to Mallory Marsh, Brian Sir, and Houghton Kinsman for joining me on the back end of the production today. So please come join us, come see photography in person, and have a fantastic day.